America's mass shooting epidemic.
Dispatch, we got shots fired, we got multiple people down.
As Washington finally hit a tipping point.
This isn't a question of NRA, Republican, or Democrat. We need meaningful background checks.
Plus, tough new attacks on the president from the Democrats who want his job.
This president has fanned the flames of white supremacy in this nation.
He's a man who cozies up to the white supremacists.
President Trump plays down the latest North Korean missile tests.
There have been no nuclear tests. The missile tests have all been short range.
Inside Politics. Biggest stories sourced by the best reporters now. Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Phil Mattingly in this morning for John King. Thanks for spending part of your Sunday with us. Why does this keep happening? That's the question Americans have been asking themselves in the days after two mass shootings, one in Texas, one in Ohio, that killed 31 people. The Texas massacre is the seventh worst shooting in modern American history. 22 killed inside a Walmart store in El Paso. Now, according to police, the confessed killer says he specifically targeted Mexicans. We'll talk about the race angle and how President Trump has responded in a little bit. But first, we start with the debate over guns and whether this time will, in fact, be different when it comes to new gun safety laws. President Trump says it will be, and that he's ready to work with Democrats on a bill strengthening background checks.
We don't want insane people, mentally ill people, bad people, dangerous people. We don't want guns in the hands of the wrong people. We have tremendous support for really common sense, sensible, important background checks. There are many bills that have been put in over a period of 4 or 5 years. Right. They went nowhere. But there's never been a president like President Trump.
Now, House Democrats passed a background checks bill earlier this year, and they want Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to take it up right now. He is not going to do that. So the question now is, how hard will President Trump push? Now, if he's looking at polls like this one, it seems, at least on its face, like a political no-brainer. 89% support for universal background checks, including strong majorities of the most Trump-friendly demographics. But on the other side, voices like this in conservative media.
George H.W. Bush, who had said, read my lips, no new taxes, raise taxes. And any kind of a deal with the Democrats on guns is going to risk the same fate happening to Trump. The only thing a new law would do would drive a wedge between Trump and his voters and the NRA. Because make no mistake, they want your guns. They want every gun you've got as quickly as they can get it.
Joining us now with their reporting and their insights, Ileana Johnson from Politico, Sahil Kapoor from Bloomberg News, The Wall Street Journal's Michael Bender, and Time's Molly Ball. And guys, I want to start here with some history because we've all covered these issues for a long period of time. We've all seen this moment that feels like a tipping point and then ends up kind of withering away over the course of a couple of weeks. If you look at, just take a look at kind of the last 20 years where you see the clusters of these mass shootings, this in particular showing shootings with 8 or more people killed, and you look at what happened during this period of time. You have, in 2007, you have the Virginia Tech shooting where nothing really occurred afterwards, small improvements in mental health data. 2012, you had Sandy Hook. Over here, nothing really happened. Background checks failed, obviously a pretty large failure for folks who are looking for gun law changes. Las Vegas in 2017, massive shooting, more than 50 people killed, no significant changes. Sutherland Springs shooting down in Texas, small kind of tweaks on the Fix NICS law, which I think was a bipartisan improvement, but nothing major. So I guess the question is that everybody wants to know, is this time different?
Well, I think there's a couple things missing from that timeline. First of all, that's a timeline of federal action. Yeah. And there's a lot that's been going on in the states during that time, some of it in the direction of loosening gun laws in some conservative states, but also in some blue states. And that has happened because there's been a building grassroots movement in favor of gun control that we really haven't seen, back in the 90s when the Democrats considered this a politically toxic issue. because it implicated them in a culture war that they thought that they were losing. That's really changed now, because in the past, when the NRA was virtually unopposed as the sort of voice in lawmakers' ears about whether they should go down this polarizing road, now there is a really big movement on the other side. You have a really remarkable grassroots and well-funded bunch of organizations that are pushing, and you see the groundswell of popular support also gradually building to the point that background checks have always been broadly popular, but other gun control measures have also become more popular among the public, which I think you can attribute to a combination of this drumbeat of continued mass shootings and this political movement that has arisen. So the calculus for lawmakers is different now, and I think that we saw that in 2018, right, where a lot of Democrats in swing districts ran very forcefully on a platform of gun control. So the politics of this issue are in flux, they're changing, and that doesn't necessarily mean that Congress will act, it never does, but it does mean that this is a different landscape for politicians than it has been in the past.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Look, in Iowa, 16 Democratic candidates at a gun safety event. People are campaigning on this, like they said in 2018. They're campaigning on it again in 2020. That's a 180 from where they'd been for the last couple of decades. I guess one of the questions that I have right now is, okay, Democrats are clearly in this place right now. Public opinion polling broadly seems to be in this place. But when you look at ballot initiatives, say in Maine or Nevada, background checks ended up failing or didn't match up with where the public opinion polling is. And when you talk to Republican lawmakers on the Hill or Republican aides on the Hill, there's still a lot of skepticism there. At least that's my take on it so far.
I think that's absolutely right. In the short to medium term, I think everything depends on how persistent President Trump is. You're not going to get Republicans in Congress to move, especially on the Senate level, unless there's clear and consistent guidance from the president and they believe he's not going to swerve like he did after the Parkland shooting, where he came out for raising the rifle age. He came out for red flag laws. People forget that. And then he backed off all of that in the face of criticism. The truth is the country has moved, to Molly's point, in a major way. The suburbs especially have moved. Suburban moms, college-educated voters are more in favor of gun control, I think, than we've seen in a very long time. And that is what's driving the Democrats' shift in favor of gun control laws. President Obama avoided this issue in 2008 and in 2012. Democrats had a majority in the House between 2007 and 2011. They didn't touch this issue because their path ran through rural areas. Those areas still oppose any kind of gun control because there's a mentality that any step toward gun control will threaten their Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, and I think you make a key point at the top, and you had a great piece about the suburbs. You should read Sal's piece about the suburbs. It's really indicative of where things are politically. But this is on President Trump. Every Republican I've talked to on Capitol Hill over the course of the last week says, tell me where the president ends up, and I'll tell you whether or not we can actually do something. And you mentioned what he said after Parkland. Take a listen to what the president said in February of 2018.
We certainly have to strengthen background checks. Everybody agrees with that. And we're going to make background checks very, very strong.
Mr. President, it's going to have to be you that brings the Republicans to the table on this, because right now the gun lobby would stop it in its tracks.
I like that responsibility, Chris. I really do. I think it's time. It's time that a president stepped up.
That was not this past week. That was in February of 2018. February of 2018, March, April, May. They did fix NICS, but they didn't do anything related to background checks at all. Why is it different now?
So this is where I think the president's week in Bedminster makes for some real uncertainty here. He's going to have people furiously lobbying him during this week, and typically it's momentum after these shootings that makes legislation happen. But I think this 1 week break and for lawmakers an August break, there's a chance that there is a loss of momentum from this issue. And the president's going to be hearing from lots and lots of different people. He's somebody who's particularly susceptible to going off of the last person he talked to. And so it will be interesting to see where the president lands when Congress comes back into session. The other factor here is that the NRA really is in disarray right now. We know the Washington Post with a great scoop that Wayne LaPierre nonetheless was still on the phone with the president, but the president also understanding that the NRA really does not have the power that it used to have. And the president saying multiple times this week that he really wanted to do something on guns, and including in remarks at a private fundraiser on Friday. So I do think something is likely to happen when Congress reconvenes, but I do think it's going to be something that is disappoints Democrats.
Yeah, you make a really fascinating point about the NRA because the organization is unquestionably in a bad place right now in terms of how it's structured, people that have left, lawsuits that have been filed, and yet Wayne LaPierre was on the phone with President Trump multiple times over the course of the last week. He put out a statement saying what I'm told he also said behind the scenes, which is when it comes to background checks, even when it comes to some of the specifics on red flag laws, the NRA simply is not there. And people say, all right, the organization's weakened, but the organization is more than just the organization here in Virginia. It is the membership, and the membership that supports very heartily President Trump. What's your read right now on kind of the NRA's role and how they're going to play over the course of the next couple of weeks?
Well, we've seen this play out before. You played the clips from after Parkland, and the answer to why Trump's shift that time was the NRA. He had some private meetings after that pretty remarkable open press event with a back and forth with Democrats, and came out of that meeting with the NRA with a different tone. He's kept the tone so far. The tone has been where he seems to want to be on stronger background checks so far. I talked to a few administration officials over the weekend, and there does seem to be a real interest in getting something done. But right now, the White House, the president's not putting this on his shoulders. He's leaving it up to Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans to put the pen to paper on what these actual changes will look like. And reading between the lines from some of the administration officials I talked to, it doesn't sound like there's going to be anything transformational here. They're going to try to get something done. Done is going to be better than good at this point for this White House. And there's even talk about more interest in kind of what they can attach to it. Does this grease the wheels for a USMCA deal or something along those lines? So again, the NRA still plays a very strong role here. And if the president wants to get something major done, the public's focus is there. The question is going to be whether his focus will be there.
Yeah, and the one thing I've heard repeatedly from Republicans on the Hill is, again, you can't leave it up to Republicans on the Hill to write this. They need to know where the president is on this. And one thing I've also heard multiple times is, tell me how universal background checks would have stopped Dayton or would have stopped El Paso. One of the things you always hear from Republicans is these specific proposals wouldn't have addressed this specific shooting, and that's why we are opposed to that. That dynamic is either going to have to shift, or, to Eliana's point, something will happen, but it won't be as broad.
It's not that, but then the criticism is going to be whether these background checks will lead to gun registries, right? So that's the slippery slope you play with.
The details here are really, really important. There's different background check proposals. It gets complicated fast. All right, up next, President Trump's post-shooting message of unity is undercut by President Trump. Act as consoler-in-chief for a grieving nation. It's a role President Trump's advisors acknowledged he has struggled with at times to fill. But in the aftermath of last weekend's shootings, he offered these words to the American people.
Now is the time to set destructive partisanship aside, so destructive, and find the courage to answer hatred with unity, devotion, and love.
Now, those are the right words, I think everyone acknowledge, but ones he apparently failed to follow himself. A day intended to comfort victims, shine a light on heroic first responders, instead featured political score settling and personal attacks.
My critics are political people. They're trying to make points. In many cases, they're running for president, and they're very low in the polls.
They shouldn't be politicking today. I had it with Sherrod Brown, he and the mayor. They're very dishonest people, and that's probably why he got, I think, about 0%, and he failed as a presidential candidate. I was here 3 months ago. We made a speech, and we had what was the name of the arena? And he had this crazy Beto. Beto had like 400 people in a parking lot. They said his crowd was wonderful.
All right, the president took his grievances to the air as well, venting from Air Force One about news coverage, political opponents, and local officials in Ohio and Texas. Now, behind the scenes, Trump fumed about how the trip was covered, with aides conceding that the visits did not go as planned. And look, rolling that all out in a timeline fashion is important. It adds value because you understand that the press isn't just doing this.
Yeah.
He's doing it. Why?
Well, it's just his personality here, right? I mean, the White House gets very frustrated with the portrayal of picking out sort of slices of this trip and painting him as unable to connect with voters. This is how he connects with voters, right? And they feel like this is all kind of priced into the equation here, right? Like when you have Democrats attacking Trump as a white supremacist, they feel like that falls on deaf ears. But what there is concern about is people who are embarrassed by Trump and asked about how they are dealing with that. I had a White House official tell me over the weekend, what are you going to do?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, when you read local press, the people that he did meet with said very nice things, said he was very effective and kind of did what he was supposed to do in those situations. And instead of focusing on that, he's focusing on the political attacks. But I do want to pivot to something that you were talking about here, and that's kind of the sharp Democratic attacks about the issues of race, and the issue now seems to be a litmus test on white supremacy. Take a listen.
Is the president a white supremacist?
He is. He's also made that very clear.
He's giving people license to not only hate, but to foment that hateful violence.
It's both clear language and in code. This president has fanned the flames of white supremacy in this nation.
He's a man who cozies up to the white supremacists. This is what he's done, the wink and a nod.
This is a different president. This is a different time. But those are explosive allegations, if you will.
They really are, and they're allegations not just at the president, but at anybody who voted for him.
Right.
And this president, I think we all know by now, he simply can't let a criticism or an attack go unanswered. And so that's why we saw those tweets from him. And so you just got to, I think the media prices it into who he is and everybody who works in the White House. So that's why you have the president comforting supporters, but also answering his critics. He's simply not going to devote a day to one or the other.
Yeah, and you make an interesting point about kind of there's a balance for Democrats right now in terms of how do you go all in on the white supremacist angle? And it's something Eugene Daniels wrote in the Washington Post. Not boldly addressing racism, one of the most discussed issues in politics, is bound to upset black voters, arguably the most influential demographic in the Democratic Party. But boldly attacking Trump could backfire if potential voters feel implicated by the criticism. I've heard that from a number of Democrats in terms of, all right, how do we thread this needle here going into 2020? Is that kind of your assessment of things too?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex issue for Democrats. It's not really clear how this plays, of course, because there is a base for them to mobilize. There's also a base for President Trump. When they hear this stuff, I think they get fired up about it. But what Democrats are motivated by here, I think, is polls that show a majority of the country believes the president is racist. A majority of the country believes the president has not done enough to distance himself from white supremacists. And actual white nationalists are saying that the president is furthering their cause, and they like things about his rhetoric and some positions that he's taking on issues like immigration. So Democrats look at that. They look at how their voters are responding. They feel the need to channel those sentiments, so they're trying to win their support in the primary.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch. You make a key point. No one's totally sure how this is going to play. It's still early in the campaign.
I think it's risky for Democrats. I mean, it's one thing to say that the president hasn't appropriately condemned or distanced himself from white supremacists. It's another thing to call him a white supremacist, which I think is an attack on any of his supporters, many of whom they need to win over if they're going to win in 2020.
Yeah, no question. Something to keep an eye on. All right, up next, we head to the center of the political universe this week, the Iowa State Fair. The 2020 presidential candidates ready to dive into that local cuisine.
I saw the butter cow from afar, but I have not actually tried the fried butter or the fried Oreo. I've been fasting all day just to be able to have it today guilt-free.
I have this whole riff about health food, and I don't know if this is the place to give that speech.
My intent is to be the first presidential candidate in American history to have at least one bite from every single food vendor.
This is amazing. So this is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on a stick.
On a stick.
I think the best way to describe this is a little slice of heaven.
That's what I call Iowa nice.
And I love that Iowa nice.
I have learned about Iowa nice. Thanks for your Iowa nice.
Iowa nice. Get it? It's pandering. 2020 Democrats working overtime to flatter those crucial Iowa voters this weekend. After all, Iowans have a reputation not only for being Iowa nice, but also for helping to pick the eventual party nominee. Let's take a look at this, because it's actually really interesting. These are the winners of the Iowa caucuses over the course of the last 8 election cycles. All right, take a look. Here's who actually ended up becoming the nominee. 6 of those 8, and we have an asterisk next to Tom Harkin because he's an Iowa senator. It was basically an uncontested primary. So Iowa picks winners in the Democratic primary. That is why you see so many current candidates spending so much time here. None more so than John Delaney. 69 visits to the state, basically living there for the last 2 years. Andrew Yang has been there a bunch too. Though if you scroll down, something that's kind of interesting when you go through the numbers, one of the lowest attendees up to this point, Joe Biden, the current frontrunner. You expect that's going to change a little bit over the course of the next couple of weeks. So let's actually take a look then at what all the polling is right now. Joe Biden, in the change since April, at 28%, still the clear frontrunner, up about 1 point in the last couple of months. Elizabeth Warren, though, up 12 points to 19%. We're going to talk a little bit more about this because there's a reason, and you saw it over the course of this weekend. Now let's take a look at first and second choice, because this is important when you talk about the Iowa caucuses. Joe Biden, first and second choice, 40%. Elizabeth Warren, first and second choice, 38%, just 2 points below. Kamala Harris, also very strong as well. What this all means when you look at it right now is Joe Biden, yes, clearly the front runner in Iowa as he is with national polls, but keep a very close eye on Elizabeth Warren. Anybody who was in Iowa this weekend can tell you she is moving. People are paying attention, and the numbers are starting to show it.
I'm at the Iowa State Fair! Woo!
Only been in this race for about 10 weeks. 8th trip to Iowa. This is a great place to remind the country and each other that there is no such thing as a permanently red state or county.
You have like this responsibility that you take very, very seriously, and I love you for it. You're a bit spoiled. You're kind of used to presidential candidates coming and showing up in, like your living room essentially.
I love the Iowa State Fair. Bender, don't worry. We were going to do mutton busting on set today, but I said let's hold off. We didn't have a helmet for you. I wanted to keep you safe.
All right.
So look, this is obviously a big weekend. It is kind of a must-do for any political reporter and obviously candidate itself. What's your read right now on the state of play in Iowa?
Well, first of all, someone needs to tell these candidates what Iowa nice really means. What that Midwest nice isn't really nice. It means that you're burying your feelings of aggression and acting nice openly. And that may be a metaphor for how these candidates are being received. The voters are very polite to your face. And that may not be what they will tell a pollster. I think, as you said, there's clearly a feeling that Elizabeth Warren is on the move. Her campaign has always put a heavy emphasis on Iowa. They believe that she has this sort of prairie populism that can appeal to not only the liberal activists who are very strong in the Iowa caucuses, but also to sort of more rural voters, farmers, working people who might respond to her economic appeal. And she also has had a very interesting trajectory. There's a sort of tortoise and the hare thing going on here, right? Where she's been slow and steady. She's been building her credibility in voters' minds in a way that is less about one big moment and more about people gradually sort of turning on to her appeal, her plans, the substantive thing there. But we still see Biden in very strong position, and all the other candidates are trying to figure out what, if anything, is going to dislodge him, and they haven't found it yet. So you do see some other candidates consolidating support. A lot of that is just voters being interested in this very large pool of candidates and trying to narrow it down, starting to gravitate toward the same group of sort of first-year candidates. But I think there's a lot that's going to happen between now and the Iowa caucuses, and it's very much in flux.
Yeah, nothing is gelled. Everything's very much in flux. But you make a good point. We talk to people on the ground there. Elizabeth Warren's field operation is for real, and people shouldn't sleep on that. And I think that's showing right now. You mentioned Joe Biden. What could bring Joe Biden down in Iowa or nationally? We had yesterday talking about kind of these slips that he has, where yesterday he talks about he was vice president when the Parkland kids came up after the shooting. He was not vice president when that occurred. There was also this comment that he made. Take a listen.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids. No, I really mean it, but think how we think about it. We think, no, we're going to dumb it down. They can do anything anybody else can do, given a shot.
Now, his campaign said immediately after he misspoke, he immediately corrected himself. He did. But it's one of those things where you see it, and you see it kind of repeatedly on the stump, and you think, what's going on? Is this just baked in, I guess, is the question at this point, or is this going to be a problem at some point?
I think like with Trump being unable to ignore criticism, Biden's had a bunch of these senior moments, and I think now you sort of have to assume this is who he is as a candidate. And the same way the president is who he is. He's not going to let shots taken go unanswered. And it doesn't seem to be affecting Biden. His place in this field seems to be pretty well established. Thus far, anything can happen, but candidates seem to sort of be, at this point, voters, at this point, seem to be fairly comfortable with this Joe Biden.
Yeah, and this Joe Biden continues to show in national polls that he beats President Trump by a large margin or a sizable margin. I think that probably has an effect on things. One other thing I was interested in, Kamala Harris's campaign launched their first ad buy. It's not a huge ad buy, but an ad buy in Des Moines over the weekend. Take a look at this.
After we were fed and in bed, our mother would sit up trying to figure out how to make it all work. That's what I'm fighting for. Real relief for families like yours. Not in 20 years, not in 30. Starting my first day as president. Because you've waited long enough to get a good night's sleep.
You have an ad buy. You clearly had crowds that were paying very close attention to her over the course of this weekend. She was buying pork chops on a stick, 6 at a time. That's obviously big in Iowa. Apparently. What's your read right now on where the Harris campaign is, specifically in Iowa?
Yeah, there's that personal story that she suggested she would want to talk a little bit more about after that first debate moment, where she thought that little girl was me. She talked about desegregation and busing. So I think that's a big part of what she's trying to do. She's been up and down in the polls. She had that big surge after the first debate, and then she's kind of back to where she was before. So I think the Harris campaign is looking at that and thinking, what can we do going forward? The personal story worked for her then. She has not naturally been doing this on the stump. It doesn't come naturally to her to talk about herself. And I think there's a bit of a backstory to a lot of that. But she's trying. I think people want to know where you're coming from, why you're supporting these things, and whether there's enough conviction behind them to go.
Bender, you're a veteran of campaigns. You're a veteran of covering the caucuses. When does it become real in Iowa? Are we there yet?
I think we're close to being there. I mean, for all this summer, the story, I think, has been Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, what they're doing to position themselves to take over the lead from Biden. They haven't done that yet. And it kind of reminds me of 2016, where Trump was at the top of the polls, and all the conversation was who was going to eventually take over from him, who was best positioned to take over the lead. And at some point, that lead stuck, and that lead became the nomination. I think you hit the nail on the head earlier with the idea of Biden being able to beat Trump. My colleague Michelle Hackman did a story over the weekend about Trump's soft polling with seniors, a crucial electorate, slice of the electorate with Republicans. And one of the best quotes in the story I thought was with a truck driver from Indiana who said, "Right now I'm a Biden man, but the only reason I am is because, according to all the polls, he can beat Trump." As long as Biden can hold on to that, this may be the trend line we see for the next few months.
And if he doesn't, watch out. There's a lot of people waiting. All right, up next, the 2020 candidates at risk of watching the next debate from home, not the stage. Different early state or national polls and have 130,000 individual donors. Now, the ones who haven't met that criteria, well, they spent the weekend practically begging Iowans for just a tiny bit of support.
It's a pleasure to speed date with you here today. Really appreciate it. If you want a second date, you can go to timryanforamerica.com.
If you know anybody has $1 after eating all the corn dogs here, ask them to send it to jansley.com.
Please know that there are powerful forces that do not want me to be in the third debate.
I've been to all 99 of your counties. Come on, all 99 counties.
All right, so I'll name the powerful forces and meet. No, I'm kidding. So talk to me. Next debate, obviously, we all expect the field to winnow down, at least what's on stage. How many people do you think actually end up there based on where they currently stand?
So far, there are 9, I believe, that have qualified for the next debate. There may be a few more, but I think this is do or die time. If you're not on the debate stage, you're not in the minds of people, and you're not really going to be able to make your case when it matters. I think you kind of fall away. Regardless, the party hasn't winnowed the field yet, but voters already have. The field is stratified into a clear top 4 in almost every poll, nationally and state. There's a 5th kind of hanging around, and everyone else is at 2% or less. I think what the candidates at the undercard need to do is go after the person who has their supporters, their potential supporters. John Delaney, John Hickenlooper went after Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. They're not going to win any support from there. They didn't go after Joe Biden, who was winning those middle-of-the-road Democrats. Will they do that? I really don't know, but that's their path.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. How long do people stay in? How long do they have the money to stay in? Will $1 at a time, besides get them to the 130,000 mark, actually be able to finance a campaign? There's also this strategy from Senator Michael Bennet, who hasn't qualified yet as well. He tweeted out, quote, "If you elect me president, I promise you won't have to think about me for 2 weeks at a time. I'll do my job watching out for North Korea and ending this trade war so you can go raise your kids and live your lives. Essentially, I will be boring. Isn't everybody tired of the last 2.5 years?" Maybe it works.
I think there's some people who that will appeal to.
I think so, yeah. Some of them might be reporters who are a little tired after the last 4 years. All right, up next, President Trump appears to take the side of Kim Jong-un over his own military commanders. President Trump appears to be siding with Kim Jong-un over his own military and some of America's closest allies. Now, on Saturday, North Korea launched short-range missiles for the 5th time in the past 3 weeks. Now, the regime says it's a brand new type of weapon. The state news agency released these pictures of a smiling Kim Jong-un looking on. Now, Trump says it isn't a big deal because they aren't long-range missiles and aren't nuclear. Hours earlier, Trump said he received a, quote, beautiful handwritten letter from Kim and then repeated Kim's complaint about the joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises that U.S. commanders and a lot of lawmakers call essential to regional security.
He wasn't happy with the war games on the other side with the United States. And as you know, I've never liked it either. I've never liked it. I've never been a fan. You know why? I don't like paying for it. We should be reimbursed for it. And I've told that to South Korea, but I don't like it either.
And in a follow-up pair of tweets about Kim's letter, Trump referred again to the, quote, ridiculous and expensive exercises and said, quote, I look forward to seeing Kim Jong-un in the not-too-distant future. Now, first, to start, the missile tests, while they might not be nuclear or long-range, they are all violations of UN resolutions, which I think is obviously something that's important to state here. Walk me through where the president is right now on North Korea, period.
So these are ballistic missile tests, and as you said, a violation of UN resolutions. The president essentially says, I don't care, because they're not a threat to American national security. This is a president who doesn't see alliances as part of American power or as part of, I think, what's important, a part of something important to the preservation of American national security. And so he's saying he doesn't care that they're a threat to Japanese national security or to South Korean national security, traditionally some of our most important allies. So this has caused a lot of trepidation in Japan and in South Korea. What the president wants is further negotiation with Kim Jong-un, and so he wants to set aside the violation of these UN resolutions in the service of getting back to the table with Kim for a third summit.
Yeah, look, he's consistent. He's been like this on the military exercises for a long period of time. He's used them as a kind of carrot and stick throughout the course of the negotiations. Hasn't shifted. But one thing I want to pivot quickly to, Bender, is the top ranks of the intelligence community has kind of departed or is in the process of departing with all of this going on right now. Sue Gordon resigned as Deputy Intelligence Director. You might not know her name, but at least on Capitol Hill and at least in the intelligence community, very well known, very well respected. And in her note to the president saying she was going to resign, Mr. President, I offer this letter as an act of respect and patriotism, not preference. You should have your team. In other words, she was forced out. There's no question about it. Yeah. Where do things stand right now in terms of DNI and kind of the intelligence infrastructure?
Well, we have a ways to go before we have a replacement at DNI, and it's going to be closely watched here for a while and for a number of reasons, including what we're seeing in North Korea and how things are unfolding in North Korea. You mentioned how Trump has kind of departed from his generals and his allies. The same goes with his intel for the last few years here. But he also comes at it from that these sort of institutions haven't gotten the job done before him, and so it's his his new way of thinking here, his different approach, can't hurt the situation.
Yeah, it's where he's been. It's where he's going to continue to be. All right, our reporters share from their notebooks next, including whether anyone wants to be President Trump's next ambassador to Russia. Time now for our reporters to share a page from their notebook to help get you out in front of the news this week. Eliana, starting with you.
I'm watching who will replace John Huntsman as U.S. ambassador to Russia. The position has a pretty storied history with some notable dignitaries serving in that post, going back to George Kennan and Averil Harriman. But I think it's become a less enjoyable and perhaps elite position in the Trump administration because of all of the questions that have dogged this president about his relationship with Vladimir Putin, and any progress that's made in the relationship, I think, is cast with questions about the president's relationship with Putin. So it will be interesting to see, I think, who replaces Huntsman. There's some talk about Stephen Biegun, who's now leading the negotiations with North Korea, replacing Huntsman, which says something, I think, about how the talks with North Korea are going, and perhaps that's an even less enjoyable post than serving as the chief emissary to Russia.
Low bar, I think. Quite a balancing act. Sahel.
Well, Senator Lindsey Graham kicked up a bit of a storm earlier in the week when he said Republicans would take another stab at repealing Obamacare if they win full control in 2021. And I just want to throw a little bit of cold water on this. I spoke to several senior Republican aides who said it's unlikely to happen. One of them actually texted me back a laughing face emoji when I asked about that possibility. Another one said it's just Lindsey being Lindsey. They don't want this to be the conversation. They want to stay focused on Democratic proposals on Medicare for all. They believe that's a good conversation for them. And they don't want a repeat of 2018 when the issue of the ACA and pre-existing conditions was a disaster for them.
The emoji response from sources, always enjoyable. Bender, what's got?
Beware the Ides of Bedminster, Phil. The president is in at his summer retreat this week, but that usually hardly means a break from the headlines. It was in Bedminster in 2017 where he first drafted his letter to fire James Comey and where he threatened Kim Jong-un with fire and fury. Last year, during his summer break, he attacked LeBron James, belittled Omarosa over her book, and called for a boycott of Harley-Davidson. Now, Trump's poll numbers tend to tick up a little bit when he can stay out of the news. So what I'm watching for this week is if the president can get a little bit of R&R or if he'll continue a summer of unforced errors from a controversial performance this past week in El Paso and Dayton, and the racist tweets he posted while we were sitting at this very table a few weeks ago.
Steel yourselves for tweets. Molly?
Impeachment. Is it happening or not? There have been some mixed signals being sent by the Democrats in the House recently, as you've had the Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler and others saying that, in fact, impeachment is already underway, even though the House, where a majority of Democrats now do support opening an impeachment inquiry, never had what usually is considered the opening of an impeachment inquiry, the full vote on the House floor about whether to go in that direction. So, Democrats members of Congress are all back in their districts for the summer recess, and some members are kind of confused about what's going on here with the leadership saying, actually, nothing has changed, nothing to see here. Is this some kind of clever strategy? Are they trying to have it both ways by mollifying the pro-impeachment base while at the same time not setting off the president or his allies with a big announcement? And meanwhile, Chairman Nadler has set out a very ambitious timeline saying he expects to get court decisions on some of this litigation for the investigations, get some more witnesses before the committees in the fall, and potentially have a vote on impeachment by the end of the year. Some skepticism about that, and more than anything, confusion. So I think when the Congress returns after Labor Day, you can expect some questions about what is actually going on here.
No question about it. Impeachment in the eye of the beholder, apparently. All right, I'll close with this. About a decade ago, I got in the habit of asking lawmakers and aides what they'd be watching during the August recess. This time around, I've really been struck by kind of the acute and growing uneasiness with the state of global affairs. Among the issues raised to me in the past few weeks, China on two fronts, trade, of course, and its posture towards unrest in Hong Kong. Iran. We just discussed North Korea, South Korea and Japan, along with their own historic tensions, now with essentially frozen diplomatic relations. Pakistan and India, where the Indian government's move to wipe out the autonomy of the restive and disputed Kashmir region has put rival nuclear powers and the region on edge once again. Afghanistan, peace talks continue, but so do Taliban attacks. ISIS, a Pentagon IG report this week said the group has, quote, solidified its insurgent capabilities in Iraq and was resurging in Syria. Also mentioned Turkey, Yemen, Venezuela, Brexit. As one senator summed it up to me this week, quote, there's just a hell of a lot going on right now that could become a much bigger problem. Let that be a good reminder. August is rarely as sedentary as the empty halls of the Capitol would make you believe. All right, that's it for Inside Politics. Hope you can catch us weekdays as well at noon Eastern. Up next, State of the Union with Jake Tapper. His guests include presidential candidates Beto O'Rourke and Cory Booker, plus President Trump's border enforcement chief, Mark Morgan. Thanks again for sharing your Sunday morning with us. Have a good one.